He has promised that, and I think that I suspect that will happen. We now learn that the ATACMS long-range missiles that we discussed for years, for 3 years almost, that Joe Biden eventually gave in the last dying days of his presidency, arrived in the quantity of 40. There are 40 rockets that Ukraine could have used and used now, but 40 is not, I would say, is not a significant amount to do anything. So it's a symbolic gesture, and hence Ukraine is ramping up its own defense production for longer range missiles and rockets. But we don't know how many Taurus missiles the Germans have or could give, but every little helps.
What more would you like to see from the Europeans now? If this is going to remain a hot war for the foreseeable, if there's no immediate prospect of a ceasefire, do Ukraine's European allies need to shift some of the discussions away from coalition of the willing, peacekeeping troops once a peace agreement is eventually reached, which may still be some way off, and in the meantime ramp up pressure on Russia by doubling down, say, on support for Ukraine in terms of military aid?
Absolutely. I think the military aid is extremely important. Financial aid is extremely important. We have quite good noises coming up from Brussels and from European capitals. Yesterday, probably a bigger deal than the phone call was the vote in the German parliament under the leadership of the incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz to allow Germans to spend more money on defense and infrastructure above the budgetary limits. The figures floating around, reach about 1 trillion euros, which is an enormous amount of money, at least half of it for defense. So it means that Ukrainian support will be driven by the German locomotive once again. We also obviously need, and I know there's been a lot of criticism of the France's position that is pretty good diplomatically, but France has a lot of weapons, armaments, and finance that it can also directly supply to Ukrainians. That's another thing that I think the French allies have to do. Britain is doing its job. So and Brussels as well have a significant achievement of allowing 150 billion euro for defense. And now Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, talks about creating a European defense union with a strategic capacity to buy armaments at central level. And we know that will cut costs as well, and will centralize and will simplify armaments provisions. So those are great processes. You would have hoped they should have happened in 2022, and so there's a 3-year delay now. But potentially this debacle between Putin and Trump will push Europeans even further to work faster towards providing support and also mobilizing its industry, its industrial base for the defense.
On Friedrich Merz, the incoming German Chancellor, do you think there is a realistic prospect that he may be prepared to do what Olaf Scholz was never and give Ukraine the long-range Taurus missiles that Germany has?
He has promised that, and I think that I suspect that will happen. We now learn that the ATACMS long-range missiles that we discussed for years, for 3 years almost, that Joe Biden eventually gave in the last dying days of his presidency, arrived in the quantity of 40. There are 40 rockets that Ukraine could have used and used now, but 40 is not, I would say, is not a significant amount to do anything. So it's a symbolic gesture, and hence Ukraine is ramping up its own defense production for longer range missiles and rockets. But we don't know how many Taurus missiles the Germans have or could give, but every little helps.
It's interesting that the EU Commission is also going to present a white paper today on the future of European defence, and it'll have guidelines on how to boost production and defence readiness amid Russian aggression. Do you think Europe needs to be more independent when it comes to its own military industrial base? Because, for example, with things like the Storm Shadows, we had this back and forth in the autumn about, well, okay, they're French Scalp, British Storm Shadow missiles, but they have American components in them, so we're dependent on the US's approval. Do you think long-term Europe needs to be far more independent when it comes to its military supply chains?
The uncertainty involved with American support for Europe generally, I think it now is spilling over into uncertainty about American supplies and weapons systems themselves. So you hear now noise about people discovering or thinking whether F-16 or F-35 fighter jets can have an American kill switch. that will not allow them to be used without American approval. That will create a lot of anxiety and uncertainty across Europe, and it's already created a lot of rumors going around. So I presume the matter of the fact that the European and Ukrainian defense industry will have to start integrating much faster, and the fragmentation of the supply chains in Europe and the differences and the little tiny stupid differences in calibers and systems will have to go away, because eventually the European Defense Union will have to be created, and it will have to be using as little range of things, but as much quantity as is possible to be produced.
Just finally, Vlad, there is obviously so much talk at the moment about these negotiations between Putin and Trump and Zelensky, etc. But, we can't avoid the fact this is still very much a hot war and the fighting is still continuing on the ground and in the skies. Give me your sense of what the reality is on the front line at the moment. I mean, we've seen Russia make gains in Kursk, for instance, but equally we have seen some limited Ukrainian advances elsewhere along the front line. What's your reading of the situation currently?
Well, it looks like the soldiers themselves are not complaining about shortage of, or at least not complaining as much about shortage of weapons or various systems as they could have. It looks like Ukrainian soldiers that we can hear from do not believe there will be a ceasefire, so there is no emotional roller coaster of waiting for the peace and now being depressed. It didn't happen, so they didn't believe that will happen anyway. So in terms of morale, I think it hasn't changed, or it hasn't been dented by this difficulties in truce negotiations. So that's a plus. And generally, I think the Ukrainians are probably confident of having enough strength to fight another 12 months, which probably is good as could happen.
So you think this could still very much be a hot war this time next year?
Well, it doesn't look like Vladimir Putin is coming back with agreeing to a ceasefire, and if Donald Trump is not willing to ramp up the pressure, and I'm not entirely sure what kind of pressure he's got, for the reasons that they don't understand the strengths of the Russian independence in terms of it's been already, cut out of the Western economy generally, of the global economy, to as much as possible. So Steve Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, said that they could ramp up Biden's sanctions from 3 to 9 on the 10 scale, 1 to 10 scale, but I don't think that's possible. Biden's sanctions are already probably 6 out of 10, and if 10 is a total naval blockade of Russia, which will not happen, there is not much room for maneuver for the Americans on the sanctions front. So the only pressure they can have is non-economic pressure, including increasing military supplies to Ukraine, which Trump is obviously unwilling to do.
So if the fighting is still happening in 12 months' time, the man who boasted he could end this war within one day won't even have ended it within 1 year.
Yeah, he'll have a massive egg on his face.
Vlad, we always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us again on Frontline.
Thanks, James.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.